A group on the platform of the People's Democratic Party that goes by the name 100% has called on the party's 2023 presidential candidate Atiku Abubakar to drop his ambition of becoming the country's #1 citizen and throw his weight behind a southern candidate. The group holds the view that such a concession or personal sacrifice would help save the party with confidence building and repairing its relationship with Nigerians. Similar calls have also been made by certain interest groups for Tinubu to resist the temptation of seeking a second term in office as President of Nigeria. While Professor Antony Kila is director of the Commonwealth Institute of Advanced and Professional Studies, he joins us now to discuss those calls on President Tinubu and Atiku and how this may impact the 2027 presidential race. He will also look at former President Goodluck Jonathan's allegations that defections are manipulations that can destroy democracy if Nigeria eventually becomes a one-party state. Thank you so much for joining us on Newsday. Professor Kila, thank you so much for joining us on Newsday.
Good to be here.
So what possibility do you think exists that both gentlemen, that's Atiku Abubakar and President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, will heed this call to drop their presidential ambition? And what new dynamics do you think could emerge if this happens?
Well, I think, overall, everything is possible in life. But this particular one has, rather low probability of occurrence, let us say. But I think it's a good call. It is important to state 3 or 4 things. Number one is that, generally speaking, what people say when it concerns partisan politics, the intention is never really clear. The people who say Atiku Abubakar or Bola Tinubu should not run, they tend to be categorizable in 4 categories. They're either people who do not like Atiku or do not like Tinubu and just say they don't run because they have other candidates, or something like that. Or people who think they're too old and they want a generational change. The other kind of people who say so are people who perhaps know that if they're away, the other side might lose. So if you think Atiku is a strong candidate, there's some politicians who will keep saying Atiku should not run because maybe they think that if he's there, they might defeat him. Or people who think Tinubu is a very strong candidate might think he should not run. So there's those very strange reasonings that you cannot see. But overall, let us put it this way: to your question, no, I think the probability of yielding that call is low. But overall, I think, and this is the third thing, I think it's a fascinating call. But before I go to the fascinating call, let me say that both Atiku and Tinubu have the legitimate right to run. That is enshrined in the Constitution. Whether you think they're too old or too young really doesn't matter. The point is, the Constitution allows them to run. I think it's a fascinating call to tell Bola Tinubu not to run. I mean, he has to listen if he wants to. I think if, for example, it is my view that it will raise the stake if Bola Tinubu decides not to run for president for the second term. That'll be a game changer. In terms of history and legacy, he'll become the first Nigerian president to say, I could run if I want, but I'm not running because I want to focus on perhaps institution building and perhaps I want to focus on some unpopular reforms. And if he does that, that will free him from the shackles on the frameable issues of the second term. He will just stand out. That's a shortcut to history making. But I doubt our politicians think that way. I think Abubakar has less reason not to run. If he doesn't run, what will he say? I was the one who could run but did not run. That's a bit feeble. It doesn't really stand. But I think it's a very fascinating conversation.
And you're right, Professor Kila. When pigs start to fly will be the day when the APC doesn't take an extra opportunity to be in the presidency for a second term. Of course, we're going to see Bola Tinubu run again. But the question for Atiku, I just want to pick that a little more. As The likelihood of him dropping out is still quite unlikely. But what about the coalition? There's been a lot of talks about arrangements and, underlying movements and undercurrents. Do you think there is more of a chance of him forming a coalition and stepping to the side to allow someone else to be the presidential candidate if it is seen that he most likely will not sail through? What do you think?
Well, let's say three things about the coalition. Number one, let's be very factual. The reason why people want a coalition is that they believe that by coming together of forces, they will stand a better chance of facing the governing APC. The idea is that if they had put together the votes garnered together by the Atiku-led PDP and the Labour-led Peter Obi, that would have been more votes than the Tinubu-led APC. That's the reason, and that's what they try to replicate. So I can see their logic. The problem that they're going to have is a problem of personal ambition and personal ego and gravitas. No matter how convinced you are, practically, it's going to be very tough to tell somebody like Atiku, who's experienced, who's been a vice president in Nigeria, who has gathered more votes than the other contenders in the last election, to easily step aside or step down and let somebody else take the vote. I think the right way to go about a coalition, which I think is legitimate, but is not God-sent. No doctor, no God has told us we must do a coalition by all means. But I think it's a legitimate thing. I think the best way to go about it is to see who has a better chance of winning. In this case, since we have more leaders, is to say who has the best chance of winning. And perhaps the best way to do that is to let everybody get together and say, what matters to us is to gain power through the coalition, and maybe they go for primaries among themselves, if they can. But you see, I suspect that there are too many people trying to rule Nigeria who are not very interested in Nigeria, but more interested in their own personal position. And that is the first challenge. And I want to call out names. I'm going to call out Atiku Abubakar, I'm going to call out Peter Obi, I'm going to call out all those who are, likely or candidate for that role, to really look at themselves to say, can I put Nigeria's interest before my interest? That is the first test they're going to have.
Now, I'd like us to talk about former President Goodluck Jonathan's claim that defections and manipulations aimed at creating a one-party state. Do you agree with this?
So, President Jonathan, because I've been very bad to him in the past, I'm one of those people who regret the way Jonathan was treated. I say this publicly because, I was one of those who called him different kind of names. I have a kind of soft spot for him lately, and my instinct is to agree with whatever he says. But on this one, I disagree. I think the idea of saying that people are defecting to another party, to the ruling party, means that the ruling party is trying to create a one-party state, is a shallow, lazy way of thinking. All parties, including the one in opposition, will be glad for people to join them. Politicians that are defecting from their party to another party very easily, we should look at it in terms of four major elements. Number one element is that these political parties do not have strong binding ideologies. That is why people can leave them. There are more diverse people in the US politics and the British politics than people who have left their politics and their parties. So that tells you that what binds them to their political party is stronger than what binds them to their husband and wives. There's strong ideology there, which we tend to lack here. The other reason, and we must be clear about this thing, is also an issue of character. A leader who is about to be a governor, a president, a deputy, a vice president, who easily leaves his party, it tells you something about his character, that he's not so deep, he's not so strong, he's not so rooted to be called leader, excellency, honorable, and distinguished. Sometimes I think in Nigeria, we're giving the jobs of men to boys, and we overrate them sometimes. I think it should be said. The third thing to be said is that the opposition, and here leadership is at play, the leaders of the opposition need to, A, find people who are of substance and make them the leaders and the faces of their parties. And B, they need to find reasons that are strong enough to keep people in opposition. If being in opposition means being poor, being irrelevant, and no vision and no dream, then people will leave them. But if there are advantages of being in opposition without being in government, then people will stay. So I think it is the duty of the opposition to keep people in opposition. And one of the ways to do it is to make life difficult for those in government. People who view and read me know that I seem to take delight in, somebody once told me, causing trouble for people in government. Yes, I do so because I believe that as a citizen, we must ensure that life is tough for those who are in government. We must criticize them for every privilege they have. We must criticize them for every mistake they make. So that overall, when people go to government, there must be a very strong desire to serve, not just to take benefits. In Nigeria, because of our weak institution, by weak institution, I refer to government and I refer to opposition, there's so many advantages in being in government and so little being in opposition. And there is no country in history or geography that has gone great without a vibrant opposition. Ideas of progress and prosperity are forged in opposition, not whilst in government.
Well, Professor Kila, we have run out of time. It was great to have you on the program. Thank you so much for joining us and for this very engaging conversation.